I'm a paranormal investigator as a hobby. I've been doing it for years and I'm in love with the science behind it. However, I'm also a hardened skeptic and will do everything in my power to explain what may be happening in a logical way. I've seen a lot I can't explain, but mostly things that don't bother me. However, there have been a couple that have legitimately frightened me. I was out investigating an abandoned motel in the middle of the night, out in the middle of the desert. It's just a random place that we found. No claims, no story behind it, just a random building about a 2-hour drive from any civilization. When you walked in, it was very obvious that people were living there at one point, with food containers and trash nearly covering the floors. When exploring abandoned places like this, I am always armed. Ghosts can't hurt you, however people and animals can, and often people are more frightening. After making sure the location was clear and safe, I felt comfortable enough to go into the basement of the structure alone. It was a very old and crumbling basement with shelves lining it, and I had to be careful on the stairs because they were all falling apart. I sat myself down on the floor, turned off my light, fired up my recorder, and began to ask some basic questions. I was there for a good half an hour before I gave up. Nothing was happening, and I wanted to go back to the others. When I stood up, I suddenly began hearing rustling from the opposite corner of the basement, behind the shelves. I turned around and pointed my flashlight over there, but couldn't see anything as it continued. I reached down and grabbed a stone, throwing it into the corner to see if it was an animal. However, it didn't stop. At that point, I drew my firearm from my side and called out, letting whatever it was know that I was armed and that they needed to come out. Still, nothing changed. I got a call on my radio from my buddy, asking where I was. I told him that I was in the basement and told him what was happening so he knew to head over to me. At that point, I backed up to the stairs, and once I reached them, the noise stopped completely. It was dead silent. I looked at the corner for a bit longer, seeing if there was anything that would move before I turned to walk up the stairs. And that's when it happened. Large, heavy footsteps came from behind me, moving quickly and were on top of me within an instant. I jumped and bolted up the stairs, racing to the top before turning around and pointing my gun down with my flashlight. I knew that was a person. It had to be, but there was absolutely nothing at the bottom of the stairs, and everything was silent again. I ended up going back to the car and needing a moment after that. I was shaken up pretty good, and to this day, I have no idea what in the hell tried to jump me down in the basement, because my friend went down there right after and told me it was completely empty. Allow me to set the scene. After my freshman year of college, my randomly assigned roommate turned best friend, and another girl on our floor who we became very close with in the dorms, all decided to rent a house together the following year. The other girl's stepdad flipped houses and had recently renovated this place that was 2 blocks from campus. The house itself was gorgeous, with a sunroom, a basement with a washer-dryer, 2 beds on the main floor with a bathroom, basically an upstairs suite with a huge master and walk-in closet, and a private bath. The other girl took the whole floor to herself since it was her dad's place, and didn't pay any rent because her family thought she was too busy with cheerleading in her sorority. That's a whole separate conversation leading up to why my best friend and I moved out. The important thing is, my friend and I had the 2 main levels just off the living room with a bathroom between us. I don't even remember when the paranormal experiences started. I remember by October, we moved in August. It was enough that our dumbasses did a seance and had already named our ghost Claire. With the windows closed, we asked her a bunch of questions, and she moved the candle in different directions for a yes and no. Things were really bad for my friend, and mildly annoying for me. This all happened on the main level, and the third girl never experienced anything. My friend would experience sleep paralysis frequently, and wake up to a woman sitting on top of her, or see her standing in the corner nearest to the closet. The sink in the bathroom between our rooms would go on and off all night. For me, she would open my door and get into bed with me. The funny thing is, at first, I didn't even realize it was a ghost doing that. After a while, when I would feel the weight pushing down in the bed, I would kept turning around and no one was there. I'd turn my back and a second later, the weight would get closer to me, turn around, and nothing. I worked 12-hour shifts on Saturdays, and I would be so exhausted, I would just let it happen. It was so frequent, it wouldn't even be worth the fight to get up and close my door or roll over and check the bed. I only saw her once. I was home alone and deep cleaning my room. The light was on in the living room, and my room was creating some sort of triangle of darkness in that short hallway. I was pulling the vacuum out of my room when in the corner of my eye, a woman with dark hair was standing behind me. Both my roommates had dark hair. She was so real that I jumped and turned around and said, "Oh my God, you scared me." As I was turning around and when I finished turning, no one was there. That was the first time Claire actually spooked me. My friend and I moved out a few months later due to a lot of issues with the third roommate. In the years following, whenever the experience gets brought up, my friend is nearly in tears about the terror that Claire put her through at night, where I joke often about how I had a ghost girlfriend cuddling with me at night. I don't know why she was so nice to me. In some ways, I feel bad that she revealed herself to me, and I was scared of her. She seemed harmless, just active. Then again, she was so awful to my friend, and that's also unexplainable. I think the funniest part of this story, though, is when constantly living with an active entity, you do eventually get used to whatever they're doing. Between nursing school and my friends and my class, plus 30 hours a week of work at a standing job, at some point, I need sleep no matter who's in bed. This story takes place in Raleigh, North Carolina. There is a nature reserve area near my old neighborhood that I used to frequent with friends that became our unofficial hangout and smoke spot. The nature reserve is called Shank Forest. The area is owned and managed by North Carolina State University and is home to some veterinary school horses. It also operates as a teaching and research site for most university forest management programs. The land itself has an interesting history prior to it being utilized for university purposes, as there was a prison farm on the land pre-1930s. When visiting this area, even prior to this experience, my friend and I would always joke about how the land had a strange energy or feel to it. In the parking area of the reserve, there was a small graveyard and abandoned house, which certainly further contributes to the interesting vibes. However, I never felt scared or uncomfortable in the space, and would often go to the area alone. Now here's the actual story. One night, I was about to meet up with my friend at the Nature Reserve Park. She was getting off work that night, and I ended up beating her there. While waiting for her, I parked my car off the side of the road and turned it around to face the direction in which you would enter the park area. Behind me was the graveyard, and I could see the area decently well in the rear view of my left side mirror. It was important to mention that my car was the only car there, and that there was no other humans in sight. The time was just past 7 in the middle of October, and the sun was almost completely set, and it was starting to get dark outside. After arriving at the park, I sat in my car for a few minutes on my phone, trying to kill time while waiting for my friend. After sitting there for a moment, something caught my eye in the side mirror of my car. In the graveyard area behind my vehicle, there was a small fire that had started on the ground. My immediate reaction was to get out of the car and stomp out the flames, and that is exactly what I did. I found it a bit odd that a fire had started, seemingly out of nowhere, but presumed someone had tossed a cigarette out before I arrived. The fire was in an area where there were dry leaves on the ground, so this was a plausible explanation for the time. After stomping the small fire out, I got back into my car and continued scrolling on my phone. It was almost completely dark outside at this point, and the sun had gone beneath the horizon. Again, something caught my eye in the side of the mirror of my car. The fire had seemingly reappeared instantaneously. I immediately presumed that I'd failed to put it out the first time, and got out of my vehicle once again to put out the flames. Upon getting out of the car, I quickly realized that this fire was separate from the first one that I had put out. It had started approximately a foot behind where the charred spot was in the leaves where the first fire was. After realizing that the ground had spontaneously caught fire not once, but twice, in a graveyard at night, I started to get a little creeped out and walked back to my car to leave. I didn't bother putting out the second fire. Just as I put the car into drive, I glanced back into my rear view to witness a third fire spontaneously start just behind the second fire, of which was still burning. This time, I saw the fire begin with my very own eyes. The next time that I returned to the area after this experience, the ground was still charred in 3 places, in a perfectly vertical line. This occurrence was not a figment of my imagination or a delusion, and I never have heard of or experienced anything like this in the years after this. Ever since I had this experience, I've been trying to come up with a reasonable explanation on how this could have happened, but I've been entirely unable to do so. There were no other humans around, and with the sun being down, there is no plausible way that these fires could have just been brush fires started by sunlight. I'm not religious, and I do not actively practice spirituality, but I feel like these spontaneous fires were a sign that I was unwelcome there, or at least at the time.